Now we're going to start again. Okay. Hello, Ofer Cassif.
Hello, hello.
Thank you very much for joining me today. You are a member of the Israeli parliament from the Hadash party, which in Israel is called the Arab Party, but you are
To be
Jewish.
more precise, it's a partnership. It's a Jewish-Palestinian partnership, always was.
Yes. And I am very curious to hear from you. Everybody is talking about the recently passed death penalty law, which, as is widely known, is basically exclusively for Palestinians and excluding Jews. And what is maybe not so widely known is that this law is part of a process, a part of a series of laws, because the law is mostly pertaining to the West Bank occupation,
Yeah.
but not to those coming from Gaza. So, would you explain to us how this works and what is coming next? Because there is a bill on the table, yet another death penalty bill on the table, right?
I would refer to it in another way. First of all, the so-called death penalty law that was just passed and there are many petitions against it. I'm signed of one of them. And I believe that Supreme Court will revoke, if not the law as a whole, at least some elements and some clauses or sections of the law. In a nutshell, the law first excludes, as you said before, Jews by saying that first applies solely to the West Bank, and secondly, it applies only to those who are not citizens or residents of the State of Israel. That excludes, of course, first and foremost, settlers. The Jewish settlers who are responsible for the most terrorist attacks, though under the auspices and collaboration of the military occupation forces, but still, the terrorist attacks are mainly carried out by Jewish settlers, and the vast majority of them are, if not citizens, are residents of the State of Israel, so they are excluded a priori. Secondly, the courts are obliged to issue a death penalty. It's not up to them to decide. And secondly, and third, there's a very limited possibility of a pardon or appeal. There is the original wording of the bill excluded all possibilities of appeals, but now it was changed due to some legal advices, and it was excluded. Still, it's not as in with usual, so to speak, laws. It's much more complicated. It's, by the way, carried out in a military court, which is another discrimination that has existed since the occupation began.
Hmm.
That settlers, Jews who live in the occupied West Bank, are subject to civil law, the Israeli civil law, and the Palestinians to military law.
Hmm.
Uh, and another thing, there are many things, but I wouldn't like to concentrate on that, given your question. But just to make it clearer for those who are listening to us, is that another violation, for instance, of the international humanitarian law is that Section 75 of the Fourth Geneva Convention, for instance, says that once there is a death penalty, and there are many limitations on the possibility of an occupying power to issue such a penalty, it should not be carried out within 180 days. There must be at least 6 months between the conviction or between the
Yeah, I think you mean
decision.
I think you mean that the law now is 90 days.
The
has a
law
90
now is
day.
90 days with
Yeah,
the possibility of extension,
yeah.
but the default is 90 days. Section 75 of the Fourth Geneva Convention says that 6 months is the minimum that should be waited between the conviction or the decision of the courts and the execution. So, and the many other aspects. Now, the law you asked about is another law, and it is not a death penalty law. It's a law that concentrates of the procedure of bringing those who were involved one way or another in the massacre of 7 October to bring them to so-called justice in Israel. And there are many problems with this law too. First of all, I must say very clearly, that those who were involved in the massacre of 7 of October committed a war crime and crimes against humanity. There's no doubt about it. And I think, and I support their, you know, their being tried. But I personally, this is my personal view, believe that war criminals and criminals against humanity, according to the international law, should be tried by international tribunals, like The Hague, for instance, and not by one or another state. That goes for both those who committed the massacre of 7 October and those who committed the genocide in Gaza, for instance, like other examples in the West Bank and not only in Palestine slash Israel. But this is another issue. Uh, let's begin with this law. The very definition, the name of the law, I say it in Hebrew first, is the חוק העמדה לדין של לוחמים בלתי חוקיים. Okay? It's the law is entitled of bringing to justice illegal combatants. Now, let's begin with that. The very definition of illegal combatants is very problematic. Why? It was, just a second, please. I have to drink my mate.
Enjoy. It's what my grandfather
Where is it
used to
from?
drink. From he was living in Argentina,
All
and
right.
that I
So
think that's where he got it
my
from.
wife and her family are from Uruguay. So
Yeah.
anyway, so in the international law, there is a distinction between two main statuses.
Hmm.
There is a, prisoner of war, which enjoys, according to the law. I'm not talking now about the practice. We all know that everybody violates it. But according to the international law, there is definition of pose, prisoner of war, and they are immune from any kind of legal, so to speak, procedure about combatants, activities. And the other status is a civilian that can be tried. Those are the common definitions.
Hmm.
Definition of an illegal combatant, according to this law and according to some other laws and the public discourse, let's not forget that we should not confine ourselves to analyzing laws only, but also we have to analyze the laws within a wider context. And the public discourse is very important because sometimes words are understood and interpreted by the legal tribunals as well, in accordance with the common parlance and the discourse. So anyway, the so-called illegal combatant is a kind of a hybrid between those two statuses I mentioned. Why? Because if those really criminals of 7 October, and by the way, I have to mention it because I guess it's not very familiar, is that the bill says that those who are regarded as illegal combatants are not only those who invaded Israel on 7 October and murdered and raped and tortured or whatever civilians, but also those who kidnapped and held Israeli hostages in Gaza. So it's not only what happened on 7 October. It includes those, for instance, if one held, let alone murdered or tortured an Israeli hostage or a hostage that was kidnapped from Israel. Not all of them were Israelis, of course. There were so-called alien workers as well that were killed, etc. So, uh, someone who, for instance, held a hostage and torture or murdered one, even if it was, say, 1 year later, is still, you know, included by this category.
Hmm.
So it should be clear. And now, this is a hybrid. Why? Because those who were involved in those crimes, Israel doesn't want to treat them as prisoners of war. Because if they were prisoners of war, according to the law or to Israel, they would not have been tried. As I said before, this status, according to the international law, status of POW, they cannot be tried. Israel wants to try them.
Hmm.
So to put them on trial. So they don't want to treat them as prisoners of war. On the other hand, they don't want to treat them as uh, civilians in because if they are entitled to some defense or some legal obligatory procedures and conditions that any civilian who is suspect is entitled to.
Hmm.
So this hybrid, and this is the basis of the problem with that law, this hybrid actually negates the rights that prisoners of wars have on the one hand, but also negates the rights that
Hmm.
civilians who are suspected in a crime are
Hmm.
entitled to.
Hmm.
And in that sense, they both there is here a very specific and special and unique status which allows Israel to mistreat those people as far as due process is concerned. Now, this is where I want to be very clear. It's not because I want to be the devil's advocate. I am not. And those are devils. Those who invaded Israel and killed and kidnapped and tortured and raped, those are devils. I have nothing to say. Wouldn't like to be their advocates. But they are human beings with rights. Even Eichmann, when he was caught, the satanic, this satanic creature, he was tried in a due process. The state of Israel even paid his attorney, by the way. So, which is here, by the way, prevented. The law says that the state will not finance the defense of those people. Uh, so this is the basis, this
Hmm.
hybrid of illegal combatants. Now, on top of that, there are many other layers that stem from this new status. For instance, this bill allows to postpone for a long time, uh, the ability of the detainee to meet one's uh, attorney.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
this is one thing.
Uh,
Yeah.
Ofer, before we continue, because you have already made some statements about these people, uh, which are both definite determinations and also, at the level of what we call hyperbole. I think like moral condemnation of people whom we have a very basic problem in this law even to know about. Because I would like to say the reason why I'm saying death penalty is that in that first clause you mentioned the goal of the law. Point one, it already says acts which are crimes against the Jewish people. And then it says crimes against humanity and war crimes. So when you say crimes against the Jewish people, you are entering the definition of the Israeli genocide law. And this is where the death penalty is
It
already
is
built in.
explicitly
So,
mentioned
so,
in the
so,
law,
so
in the
we,
bill.
we, we can see that there is a logic that continues from the recently passed law. I'm saying what I was just saying was about the evidentiary basis is extremely problematic here. And we have heard this from the prosecutor of the southern region, Moran Raz, last year. There was at the beginning of January in Ynet big interview, and she said, "We have a problem. We simply don't have what you usually need in order to prove these things, with a certain act connecting to a certain person. So, as far as I'm concerned," she was saying, "all these people need to die. You came to open a lock. You came to pick avocado, as some say. We don't. It doesn't matter. It's all part of a one big thing." So, can you talk about this generalization? Because this is probably one of the most disturbing things about this whole law and the in this context the possibility of a death penalty on this basis.
There are many layers, or there are many elements that you mentioned. I try to refer to them as a whole, together. Uh, First of all, you are totally right that in the beginning I wanted to get to there, but step by step. But if you mention it, so let's move forward. There is a law in Israel against genocide, and which, by the way, also includes an incitement to genocide. We all know that many within Israel actually have been inciting to genocide against the Palestinian people since 7 October and even nowadays within the parliament too. And I mentioned it, by the way, and I also submitted a complaint to the Attorney General against some members of the Knesset who were very clear in inciting to genocide against the Palestinian people. We just saw a couple of days ago, this week, the chair of the committee, of the Interior Committee at the Knesset said, and I quote, that there aren't any innocent people nor innocent children in Jenin. That means that they are all should be killed according to that. This is an incitement to genocide, but unfortunately, and as opposed to the common myth, the Israeli judicial system is far from being fair and unbiased. Not since the 7 October only. It got, worsened, but it was like that always. But so there is the bill does mention explicitly in one of the first, perhaps even the first section. I do not hold the bill in front of me, but if I remember
Mm,
correctly, it was in a section, the first or second section,
okay.
that it mentions that the bill is partly based on this law against genocide. And as you said, it also refers explicitly as to crimes against the Jewish people.
Mm,
Uh, Now, there are other generalizations and there are other problems which are part of what you mentioned. For instance, and this is one reservation I actually submitted in the last discussion in the committee, but is that normally in criminal law, there is a reference to people as suspects.
mm,
Here, the law begins, and if you hold it with you so you can see it, perhaps even quote, because as I said, I'm not having it with me now in
mm,
front of me, the law doesn't even refer to suspects, it refers to those who committed,
mm.
as if it was determined before the process that
Yeah,
they are already guilty.
yeah,
This is not a slip of a pen.
mm,
I
yeah,
think this is a huge problem. But also everything that has to do with the evidence
mm,
of collecting the evidence. There is no really due process, not only because it's in the military court, but also because the evidence is mainly held by the security services, the Israeli security services, and the military and some other so-called security forces.
mm,
And some of the evidence will be considered as confidential, and perhaps even those who are suspects and their representatives will not be able even to see the evidence. This is something that happened. This is not something new, by the way.
mm,
The thousands and thousands of so-called administrative
mm,
detainees,
mm,
which is a sugar-coated term for people who were kidnapped
mm,
and held sometimes for years without trial,
mm,
it's because it's said systematically that there is evidence against them that is classified and cannot be exposed. So here they use this uh, historical treatment and historical system and just, raise it to another level.
yeah.
Uh, so obviously, again, the basis of all is the very invention of the term illegal combatant.
Mm,
This is the basis.
mm,
If you just, take this ingredient from the bill, everything collapses.
mm, mm,
And the problem is the very definition.
mm,
And on top of that is the lack of due process of any kind of fair legal procedure
mm,
because of the evidence, because of the attorney, because of the military court, because of the public discourse that, and as I said before, because they are defined not even as suspects according to the law.
mm,
Now, again, it's important to understand because in Israel, I know that in Denmark and most of the international community, it's not like that, hopefully. In Israel, it's very common that if you defend basic human rights like due process, you are immediately accused in supporting the accused, the
mm,
suspect,
mm,
which is obviously, it's a sham, it's a lie. I support the bringing to trial the suspects of 7 October, but it must be under democratic laws, in a fair legal procedure, and better, as I said before, in international tribunal. But this is another issue, I guess.
Yes, because I mean, it brings us to the whole issue that the occupation itself, as defined by the International Court of Justice, 19th of January 2024, is wholly illegal. So Israel shouldn't have a jurisdiction upon these people in the first place. But it's so weird because Israel does not, on the one hand, does not consider Gaza occupied, that it disengaged from Gaza in 2005, and the whole world basically defines it that it is occupied.
Sure.
And then we're getting all these
And nowadays,
discussions.
Lebanon is occupied too, by the way. Let's
Yeah,
not forget
yeah, yeah.
a great
Uh,
part of Lebanon, I mean.
yeah. I want to ask about this because I have the bill here and it was point 17A as far as I remember. No, yes, 17B. It's in Hebrew, so the order of evidence is the theme, and it says that
Mm.
military court that is concerned with these procedures according to this law, is allowed to deviate from normal order and norms of the court and rules of evidence. and so on. Is this are these the things that you are seeing in this law, which makes it different from other
That goes
laws,
back to what
whatever?
I just said. I generalized it by saying that the evidence is held by the so-called security services.
Mm,
But obviously, we all know that a due process, a fair legal procedure in any normal democratic society, uh, consists of many elements, and one of them, apart from having the right to be represented by an attorney, and even if you cannot afford one, so the state must afford one, etc., etc. But evidence, is something that is very crucial. Now, this specific section, but the law as a whole, you mentioned a specific section, but if you look at the bill as a whole, you can see that some elements of the same kind exist throughout the bill. So actually, it allows the state via the military court to deviate, as you said, from everything that is considered in a normal, democratic, if you like, liberal society as a due process. And it's very vague, by the way. And this ambiguity or vagueness, if you like, actually plays into the hands of the state at the expense of the rights of the suspects.
mm,
Now, uh, first and foremost, of course, it's evil in itself. It is sown in order uh, to revenge.
mm,
I mean, now after 7 October,
mm,
throughout the last 3 years
mm,
almost,
mm,
the main incentive and motivation, not only on part of the government, the coalition, and many within the parliamentary opposition as well,
mm,
but in the public at large,
mm,
it's less important for them to confront
mm,
the terrible crimes that were committed,
mm,
to achieve security, which in my view necessitates
mm,
Palestinian liberation and justice.
mm,
But let's rule it out for a second.
mm,
Even in the narrow sense of a fair trial,
mm,
uh, it is also in interest of the victims.
mm,
Because if the procedure is not fair,
mm,
if the evidence
mm,
is not uh,
mm,
achieved and analyzed fairly,
mm,
so then the result, apart from being unfair,
mm,
or at least, a second, sorry, or at least there is the risk of being unfair,
mm,
you cannot even say that the justice for the victim is achieved.
mm,
Because if the results are not very clear,
mm,
if you cannot be as positive as possible, it's
mm,
never 100%,
mm,
but as positive and sure as possible,
mm.
that those who were
Yeah,
convicted rightly,
yeah,
and the results are correct. So then it's not only evil, it's not only unfair, to say the least,
mm,
towards those who were tried, but also towards the victims.
mm,
So
mm,
it's unfair on both sides, on
mm,
top of being,
mm,
as I said before, evil in
mm.
itself, because it doesn't respect the rights of the suspect, etc., etc.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
this bill is created in order to, and in that sense, it's the twin brother, as it were, of the death penalty that already passed.
yeah. This
Those
is
are twin brothers because both
mm,
are not interested in justice. Those are not interested, not even in the narrow sense, the
mm,
legal sense of retaliation, but in revenge, in violent revenge, and in racism, and in showing to, especially to the people in Israel and some abroad, look, don't mess with us.
mm,
That's the real intention here, not
yeah.
justice. I seek justice. I want justice.
Mm, mm, mm. Ofer, we are in agreement that this is a twin, like you say. This is whatever wording is used there, this is intended as a death penalty law, right? This is what we're looking at. And I think I understood from you, maybe shortly, because we have just a few minutes left. Uh, if you could explain like why this was taken as a separate law, is it just the judicial basis, and what is the support that you are seeing? You are part of this, I think, judicial committee that is also handling the bill. What is the response there or the support to this as compared to the one just passed?
The main difference between them is that the death penalty deals mainly with a sanction, with a punishment. Uh, the This law of the so-called illegal competence deals more with the procedure and
Mm,
less with the result. This is a huge difference. Now, obviously, we opposed the death penalty because we opposed it in principle, and the majority of the parliamentary opposition voted against the bill, against the death penalty. Apart from Lieberman's party, which in some respects is more fascist than the government,
mm,
it's not a coincidence. They initiated the attempt to impeach me, for instance, and in 2019 even to ban me, from participating, from being a candidate. Uh, Apart from them, the opposition as a whole voted against the bill. As far as the illegal competence is concerned, the vast majority of the parliament support this bill when it was actually agreed upon between most of the opposition and the coalition. Within the Constitution, Law and Justice Committee, in which I'm a member, I was the only one that didn't vote in favor of this bill. All the others voted for it, including Labour.
right.
So there is a huge difference, and especially because of what I said in the beginning, that the death penalty, as the name suggests, is mainly about killing people, and to be very to put it bluntly, and so it is more about the reservations as well as the support is because of the result of a trial, and the legal competent is much more about a specific or special procedure. Uh, so, and because of that, it gains much more support. There were some elements in the original wording of the bill that were deleted in order to achieve the support of Labour and Yesh Atid and others, because there were some elements, even worse ones, that they didn't
Mm,
accept,
yeah,
and the difference is because whereas the death penalty deals with something that may happen in the future, the illegal competence actually deals with something that already happened.
right,
So
right,
that's the main rationale behind the distinction.
right. Do you think that no, you didn't quite explain the legal status? So a legal competence because those people from Gaza are under another status than people in the West Bank, occupied people in the West Bank, right?
It's as I
Is
said before, it's in order to bypass, those two statuses that are recognized by international law, including the
mm,
humanitarian international law,
mm,
which are the prisoner of war on the one hand and civilians on the other hand.
okay,
So this specific status of illegal competence allows the Israeli authorities to, as I said before, to negate the rights of the suspects on both
mm,
sides, so they cannot enjoy the rights
yeah,
that are given, but according to the international
mm,
humanitarian law, to prisoners of war on the one hand, and it
mm,
also allows the Israeli authorities to negate and to and disrespect the rights of those who are regarded as civilians. That's the main issue here,
mm,
as opposed to the West Bank. But in the West Bank, in some respects, it's even worse, by the way.
mm.
Uh, uh, so that's the main reason.
Okay. Okay. And your expectation of, I mean, we are seeing a process, a twin process, as you say, and what is your expectation of the passing of this, the timing of what is going on with this bill? Now you have a break in the Knesset, so what does it look like? Timeline, maybe shortly, expectation.
Uh, we are supposed to be back from the recess in the middle of May. The big question is whether Netanyahu is going to announce the elections already in May or even June or not. If there are elections, I mean, if elections are going to be declared by Netanyahu already in May, June, I don't believe that this bill will pass before.
Ah,
But if the elections, and it seems that the elections are going to be held eventually in October, towards the end of October, so that means that the next session of the Knesset is going to be to reach his end, his blessing end, only in or towards August.
yes,
Then there
yes,
is a chance that they will succeed in passing it before.
yes,
That's the question,
yeah.
whether the Knesset survives after the recess or not. I'm afraid it will.
That the you expect that the law, the bill may be passed as law sometime in June, probably.
I guess in June, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Ofer, thank you very much for explaining these things to us.
Thank you for having the
Yeah.
chance.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
You too, thank you. תודה
Okay.
רבה.
Ta-da.
ביי.